We were trained to work out, but what about working in? Whether the topics are mental health, meditation, spirituality, holistic medicine, or sexuality, host Josh Bieneman and guests have real conversations about balance and personal growth within the sports community. This is Locker Room Alchemy.
What is happening, everybody? My name is Josh Bieneman, and I'm going to be your host here on Locker Room Alchemy. This is episode number 1. This is the initial launch, the first wave in what I'm hoping is going to be a shift in consciousness in the sports community, which sounds like a ballsy-ass statement to make, and I'm well aware of that. And the only reason I'm confident enough to make a statement like that is I do feel that I am not alone, and that there are a lot of people across the country where I'm at in the U.S. and across the globe that love their passion, love the sport that they grew up with, their sports and the traditions associated with it. However, it's time to see the athletic community in a different vibe and a different frequency. And now is a better time than ever. So let's get this bad boy started. Some of the subject matters we're going to be talking about in this podcast throughout the episodes are going to be mental health, spirituality, meditation, sex, sexuality, drugs, alcohol, religion, holistic medicine, physical wellness, fitness, sports conspiracies, aliens, anything that is just a little bit off the beaten path of what we would consider to be normal within our traditional sports community. So who am I, and why the hell do I want to talk about all this weird stuff? My background is in baseball, and for frame of reference for everyone listening, the date that I'm recording this is May 4th, 2020, and here in Ohio in the U.S., where I live, we have been under quarantine or lockdown for 7 weeks now. So I am on freeze for both of my positions, my full-time position and my part-time position. They're both in baseball. My full-time gig is a pretty cool one. I run a baseball program for a company called Force Sports here in Northeast Ohio. We have 26 baseball teams, ranging from ages 8 to 18 years old. And then we also have in-house training with lessons, group clinics, and then off-site college showcases and camps throughout the Midwest and the North Atlantic. And my part-time job is with the Los Angeles Dodgers as an associate scout. As an associate scout, I help scout amateur players, high school and college in Ohio and Michigan. This is my second year with LA, and prior to the Dodgers, I was with the Boston Red Sox for 3 years. To be straightforward with you guys, the main reason I started this channel or podcast is I think the athletic community, my own community, has gotten corny as shit with a lot of stuff, especially with the self-emotional development, self-expression, self-growth. Anything that has to do with individuality, I think we've really taken our eye off the ball, not to sound corny there. But from the moment that we got into sports, I think all of us at some point had to buy into the notion of it's about the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back, right? We've all heard that. And I do believe there's a ton of value that comes along with those principles and that mantra and that mindset. But at a certain point, guys, the name on the back of the jersey becomes pretty fucking important. And knowing who that person is and what they stand for and their principles, that's all you got. That's all you got when you're done with your sport, even though you may still be in that community. You can't be trapped in that identity. And that's where I have some shortfalls, and that's why I'm doing this. And hopefully my voice will inspire other voices, and we get a lot of cool people on here that can make some change and get people not feeling so stuffy and uncomfortable talking about funky shit in the athletic community. Because if it helps, guys. And I think unloading some of our insecurities and some of the things that we feel that we are alone when we worry about, I think it can only help. Why the name Locker Room Alchemy? The term alchemy can be defined a number of different ways, but I'm just going to read off 2 of the more common definitions. The first one is the medieval forerunner of chemistry based on the supposed transformation of matter. It was concerned particularly with attempts to convert base metals into gold would you find a universal elixir? And then the second is a seemingly magical process of transformation, creation, or combination. Unless you vibe with the ancient worlds and the old beliefs of the yogis and the mystics, then you probably resonate more with the second definition, which is what this podcast is going to be about. It's more of the esoteric meaning of alchemy and the magic of self-transformation rather than the physical transformation of the lead into gold. And Locker Room, just to represent that judgment-free space that a lot of us can probably recall back to and remember some funny but honest moments that occurred in there. And that's the type of environment that I'm hoping to create here, where we can just let it hang out. Like back in the day, physically, metaphorically, whatever you got to do, but have some real conversations, share some real stories, and hopefully we can all grow from this. Before I jump into my personal story with mental illness, I do want to give one disclaimer. I am not a medical expert. I am just a diagnosed crazy ass dude that has done a lot of dancing in the dark, and I'm going to share my stories. I'm a big believer that most of the time stories can help more than prescriptions when it comes to this stuff. So this is my way of trying to help take or leave any advice or stories that I give. It's not going to be for everybody, but if it's for one person, then hey, that's a win. My journey with mental illness began my freshman year of college. That was the first time that I started to pick up on some of the subtle differences in my personality and behaviors. Nothing dramatic. I know a lot of people have a psychotic break or an episode where it's a very rude awakening to a new reality for them. For me, it was more of just a gradual fade in some of the enjoyments that I had prior. One of the most noticeable changes was just a new threshold for social engagement, even in the sense of just one-on-one conversation. So like an example would be, as a 18-year-old, and we're all freshmen in college, our motor should be pretty high, especially as athletes. And I would go to 2 or 3 classes and then have practice, and it's 6:00. And by that point, like, I didn't fucking want to see anybody. Like, I just didn't want to see people. I was done. Like, it was just my cup was full. And it wasn't that it was a physical fatigue, but I just was done with people for the day. But my teammates at 6:00 were ready to go out to wing night or go to the baseball house for some beers or Monday Night Football or whatever it may be. And I remember thinking, like, you guys are bananas. Like, I couldn't wrap my head around how they had so much energy and could withstand so much engagement. It was almost where I started to feel like I didn't have the same gene as most people when it came to just social capacity. The coping for that was just a little bit more rest needed. Not even sleep, just more alone time, just isolated time. So I get home and I just need to go down the basement by myself for an hour and just put the phone away and not talk to anybody before I could reemerge and join society. But I always needed that time. And especially on the road trips, even if it was just a weekend series, I remember after a game day, getting back to the hotel and you go get showered up, you come out, get your meal money, and then everybody's buzzing around and trying to look for ass in the hotel. Any lacrosse teams that are staying there as well, or looking for the best restaurant to go to. And I was just looking for an empty room just to pull back. And I didn't know why. I just knew that was my alone time that I needed. And if I did not get that, then I was just going to be kind of a piece of shit all night. I was probably just going to be lethargic and not very interesting. And as these things start to unfold, you start to get more subconscious about it and thinking that you're made of glass and everybody can see what you're thinking and feeling. So that just makes you more insecure about it. Long bus trips were definitely interesting. If we were going on a 15 to 18 hour trip for our spring break or whatever, I would sleep out of 18 hours. no shitting, I would probably sleep 16 out of those hours. And looking back at it, what makes sense to me was that there was just so much energy in a small space, so many conversations, so many distractions, so many screens, and what movies playing, and it was just too much. And the only way for me to kind of turn that noise off and save my brain from just being oversaturated with information was just to close my eyes and try to pass out. I think one of the reasons things didn't get too much worse than that in college was just the schedule that I was under as a college athlete. So any college or professional athlete can attest to your day is made up for you from 6 a.m. You know, you got to be at the weight room. You're told what you're going to be working out that day. 8 a.m. you go to class, so on, so on, so on, all the way down the line, sometimes till 9, 10 o'clock at night with study hall. So that kept me on this track where I didn't have to make too many decisions with my time, and probably prevented me from having too much free time to get in my own head. Because I think that's what a lot of athletes end up succumbing to after college or professional sports, is that now alone time, that first day where there is no schedule. I had my first panic attack not too long after college baseball. And for anyone who has not had a panic attack, if you ever had the grand privilege of having one, I'm going to walk you through the play-by-play. Your heart starts pounding, and then it starts pounding out of control. You think it's going to go away, and then it just doesn't go away. You think you're having a heart attack, then you realize that you're about to die. Then somehow, some way, you're safe. Somebody comes and gets you, or you realize that you're going to be okay. Then you realize you just had a panic attack. Everyone's looking at you. You feel like the biggest fucking bitch in the world. And then you go hide. That is pretty much the summary of my first panic attack. And from what I hear, a lot of people experience the same thing. The first one that I had, I was 23. I was driving at the time. I was working for a youth baseball program, and I was coming back from lunch. I remember just being under stress, under, again, 23-year-old stress. No, 23-year-old, no family, no real bills stress. But I remember being under stress of just kind of in a new world, trying to prove myself, and you're trying to take that competitive and successful attitude that you had as a player and now apply it right into whatever the hell you're trying to do for a profession. So that's what I was doing, and probably doing way too much and putting too much pressure on myself. And so I'm driving, and I feel those couple of thumps in my chest. It gets my attention, but like any athlete, you brush it off and you continue. Then I feel them again, and then they just continue and continue and continue till I realize that something is not right. So as soon as I could, I pulled over on the side of the road, started immediately having trouble catching my breath once I realized that something wasn't right. And I do remember debating calling 911, but being so concerned that I wouldn't even be able to get words out of my mouth. So I said that if I got any shot of surviving, and again, even though it's funny for me to look back at now, at the time, you really think you're dying. Like, you think this is it. This is how you're going out, is a heart attack at however old you are at that time. So I decided to try to drive back to the office, and as soon as I get there, I park and run in. And of course, it's full of like 10 people when there's usually like 2. And I grab one of my coworkers, pull him over to the side, and as calmly as I could, try to explain what's going on, and said, "Look, dude, I think I'm having a heart attack, and I need you to take me to the hospital." Luckily, he was a good dude, and took me serious. And we went out to the car. And at the time, I was not religious or spiritual at all. But again, you think you're dying, or I thought I was dying. So I asked him to pray with me, started trying to mumble out what I wanted him to tell my mom and dad. So he tells me just to shut the fuck up. And uh, as soon as we see the first urgent care, he pulls over and we go in there. They hook me up to the EKG. And like I said, once you're in a safe space or in a space where, like people know what the fuck's going on, you know what I mean? Like they might be able to help you. It almost instantly just goes away because the fear of dying, which is really becomes the ultimate fear during a panic attack, instantly goes away because you know that if you die, there's people that are going to be able to hopefully resuscitate you. At least that alleviate the fear from me. So it was almost instant. It was I could breathe, my heart rate went down, and they told me that I was okay. I probably had a panic attack and gave me like a brochure and to call my physician. And that was my moment where I just felt like the ultimate de-pantsed man. I felt like I was just naked in front of all these people, and that they all now knew officially that I was a bitch, that I had some mental issues that had gotten so bad that I needed to screw up everybody's day, run up my uh, health insurance bill, and freak everybody out. I do remember the days following that being pretty tough. I think anytime you get knocked on the chin as an athlete, it can be tough to swallow. So that was the ultimate blow to my ego. But the positive side about being an athlete is that we're used to injuries, we're used to losing, and especially for baseball. I mean, shit, they were saying you hit 300 going to the Hall of Fame. So I was used to failure. So I got back on the horse pretty quickly, but I do remember almost like the feeling that there was like now this boogeyman over my shoulder, just knowing that I had set off something that couldn't be unset, if that makes sense. And um, there was a little bit of a paranoia about it, and wondering if I was going to get another one, and doing the old Google searches and seeing that some people only get one, and it has to do with maybe just you're really stressed, or maybe it's hormones or something like that, or this could be something that could be a new normal for me. Fortunately, panic attacks wasn't a huge part of my newly acquired mental illness fun box, but I did have a couple of them. If it helps anybody that's listening to this now, all of mine, I want to say had 4 in total, and that's over a span of about from the first one to the last around 4 years, maybe. So maybe one every year. They were all triggered by just feeling trapped with work or commitments. All of them were after I had been working like 7+ days in a row, and like really focused on something, and I just didn't see like a break in the near future where I could just kind of like zone out, where I could disappear, go off the grid. So it was the looking down the barrel of a gun where I knew I had to be plugged in socially. Like an athlete does, I started to develop some of my own workarounds just to make sure that I didn't set myself up for an embarrassing moment. So it's almost like a NBA player getting older in their career, and they can't drive to the hole like they used to anymore. They can't be as physical, so they gotta develop a jump shot. What did that look like? That meant for any large public gathering, the first thing I needed to identify when I got there was where the restrooms were, because that was always my ace in the hole. If I started to feel lightheaded, or my heart started to beat irregularly, that was going to be my go-to. And even though I never had to use that and run to the restroom as a panic attack, that was always my go-to strategy if it did happen. From a dating standpoint, that just meant I needed to isolate and dominate. I needed to make sure that I was in smaller spaces, that I wasn't going out to real big restaurants. If I was going on a first date or something like that, just because large crowds started to be too much, and I could withstand them if I was with people that I knew. But if I was trying to connect or trying to act like I was connecting with someone, I needed to be in a more intimate environment, just a smaller space, a restaurant or something like that. So I guess any advice to people that are trying to date with some anxiety right now is to just make sure that you're setting yourself up for success, and not going to some large restaurant where it's you're going to be bumping into people all night, and it could potentially just become a little bit too overwhelming. Luckily, I was able to convince one woman to marry my crazy ass, and that's where the story starts to take a turn in solutions instead of problems, and just workarounds. Like any true story, the victor or the hero was generally the woman, and my wife was definitely the hero for me, and starting to actually take proactive steps rather than just trying to patch holes that were just occurring along the way. Shortly after the birth of our daughter, I was 27 years old, and somehow my wife was able to convince me to go to my primary physician. I was just starting to be a dick is the best word to use. I could sit here and say frustrate or easily frustrated, and I start to lose patience. But I was just being a dick. It was it was the first time where I didn't have opportunities to slip away and get that mental clarity, or I didn't think I did because I didn't think I had the tools to do so at the time, because my coping mechanism for overstimulation, which obviously a wife and a baby brings a lot of, was just kind of going off the grid for a day. And when you have a family, you can't do that anymore. So my whole system had to be rebooted. The two main fears that I had about going to the doctor were, one, that I was going to be locked up in a mental institute, and two, that I was going to be given some type of drugs that were just going to completely wipe out my personality and my creativity. The fear of getting locked up in like a mental institute or something like that, at the time, it was completely irrational, but no one could convince me otherwise. Um, the few people that did know what was going on and that I was thinking about going to potentially talk to a doctor, they tried to convince me, and it just was not happening. So it was almost like I just had to grit and bear that it was a possibility going into the doctor's office, that those four guys in those white suits and with the white scrubs or whatever were going to jump out and put me in that straitjacket and take me away. It was just one of those things that was just programmed in my head, probably from some movie somewhere, that the game was rigged, and I was about to find out. So I finally get the nerve to go talk to my doctor. So I schedule the appointment. I go in, and it's one of those moments where you want to wear like a hoodie and a face mask or something, and just and slide in there incognito, thinking that like there's gonna be like all these people that you know in there, and everybody's gonna hear the receptionist call out while you're there. So it was a very heart racing moment. It was a very anxious moment for going in to talk about anxiety and depression. So I get back, and my heart's pounding. I'm sitting on that doctor chair, and he asked what's going on. So I tell him my two main symptoms, and the first one was more the anxiety, and it was just a constant feeling of like having one foot all the way down on the gas pedal and the other foot all the way down on the brake. That was the best way I could describe it at the time, and still today it's the best way I could describe it, where it was just from the moment I woke up till the moment I drifted off to sleep, it was just like a constant pull and push against myself internally. And it was just a matter of how well I was going to balance it that day, and to determine what kind of day I was going to have. The depression definitely worked in cycles. It was about every 3 weeks or so. was about 3 days every 3 weeks where I would just get wiped out, and it would just, I could feel it coming on, and it was almost like a curve. I got so good at navigating it that I knew when the beginning of the wave was coming, when I was at the top of it, and when I was going to start coming down. And the top of the wave was tough. Thoughts ranged anywhere from self-pity to death at times. And to anyone that is listening to this, what I can say coming out the other end, or now being able to just get better optics on what I was dealing with, is that voice, that friend that circles back with you time and time, and for some people too often. It's not what you think it is. And I get if you hear that and you say, fuck you, because I've been there. I understand what you're saying. However, it's a Wizard of Oz, man. It seems like it's this powerful thing that is pinning you down, and it has all the optics and illusions of doing so, but it's a short little fucking bitch behind a curtain. I'm telling you. And I can tell you that from 100% certainty that is what we're dealing with. However, the illusion is pretty damn strong, and it takes some work to just get a better angle on it. But anyway, back to the story. I told him those two things, and he fairly directly and pragmatically just told me that he thought I had severe anxiety and depression. And I appreciated that, because I'm just a straightforward guy. I want to know what's wrong, what I need to do, and get me back out on the field. So he prescribed me some medication to take daily, told me I was going to feel like shit for a couple of days, but I would feel probably better by week 2 or 3, and that I should look into some psychiatry or a therapist. Being a hard-headed guy, I just took him up on option 1. So I did get the prescription. I did indeed feel like shit for a few days, and I felt better by week 2 or 3. To his word, I felt better. And because of that, it even took away some of the brief moments of me thinking that I should go see somebody or talk to somebody. I just figured this was my Advil. It was working, and until it wasn't, I just wasn't going to do anything else. The boxes that the medication checked for me was the day-to-day anxiety was, I'd say, taken from if I was calling it a 10 at its worst right before medication, it took it down to about a 2. And the frequency of the depression went from about once every 3 weeks to about once every 6 months or so. What it didn't fix, though, was a lot of the habits and the bad lifestyle choices that I made to cope and to try to maneuver around a lot of my shortcomings. And one of those things for me was just trying to avoid the low depressions at all costs. And I knew the winter was going to be tough no matter what I did. It still is not enjoyable for me. If you're not familiar with wintertime depression, you can look up seasonal depression. It affects a lot of people throughout the country, and it's just based on sunlight. And because the effects I already had, the lack of sunlight just meant that the winter was just going to be a double kick to the groin. So every fall I would find myself with some new interests. It would be like the stock market, or I was going to get into sports gambling and then become an expert in that. It was always something completely out of left field that is probably whatever was hot at the time or whatever was around me. I decided to take that and run with it, just because I think subconsciously I knew this is like Game of Thrones. Winter was coming, and I needed something that was risky enough to keep giving me those boosts of adrenaline throughout the winter, so I didn't fall into what I thought was that wintertime depression trap. The winter of 2018-19 is finally when my wife just had enough of my shit, and she just put her foot down and told me I had to go talk to somebody. It wasn't up for discussion anymore. And by that point, I was game. I was finally just exhausted. I was just done. I felt like I was at the end of the ride. I couldn't, almost like on a riding a bull. Like I just couldn't hold on anymore. I had been holding on for 31 years. And I knew it was just time just to let go. I didn't have the energy anymore. And even though I knew I had to take that step, the the scariest part was just not knowing what was waiting for me once I hit the ground. So not knowing essentially what type of damage I had done to myself by ignoring probably the problems that I should have addressed a long time ago. It's kind of like I had been driving my car for 8,000 miles without getting an oil change, and all of a sudden my engine starts uh, making funny noises, and I'm just sitting there speculating, Lord only knows what type of damage I've done. But I did the Google search and found a psychiatrist near me and made the phone call. Before I get into my experience with the psychiatrist, let me note that I'm sure there are some great psychiatrists across the country. I'm not trying to shit on the practice and the work that a lot of people do to help a lot of people, but my one experience with my one psychiatrist was shit. What stands out to me most about the first appointment was just simply how quick it was. It was 15 minutes max. And the first 10 minutes, it was me divulging my innermost secrets to him. And cause I figured like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. Cause, I'm not going through this again. I'm not breaking down and having to come in and talk to some new guy. So if I need new meds, give me new meds. If I need to go talk to somebody else, send me somewhere else. But I was going to do it. So I laid it all out there, and it was just, I was waiting for like an interaction. I was waiting for like eye contact. Like, I don't know. I wasn't necessarily like wanting or expecting to like lay down on the couch thing or going through like talk therapy, but I was expecting like some type of engagement. It was very dry, and it was just a rundown of all the problems that I had and a few solutions that he had to solve those problems. His suggestions to me were the balanced stuff, obviously, of waking up a little bit earlier to enjoy breakfast or make a more balanced breakfast, to set up the day, less screen time, try reading a book at night to kind of clear my head a little bit, that type of stuff. But he also wanted me to double my meds, and he then kind of tag team me with the therapist. So now I'm seeing a psychiatrist and a therapist, and not necessarily enjoying that idea, but I stay committed to it. I knew that if I was going to make a change, I was going to have to suck it up and just do some things that I didn't necessarily want to do. Therapy was actually okay. I felt like it taught me some tools. The best analogy I can give is almost like a hitting coach or a shooting coach or something. It was kind of like a skill coach where you go in and he was teaching me some strategies where if I started to feel some anxiety or depression or some symptoms, I could use those coping mechanisms to maybe center me up a little bit before I started to spiral out. There was one major disconnect that I just could not get over with the psychiatrist and therapist, though, and that was smoking weed. I started smoking marijuana right around the time of my first psychiatrist appointment. It was just a random event that got me to try it. I had just done some like normal research of mental health and just some like alternative ways to help cope, and marijuana was one of them. So I guess I just had that nugget stored in the back of my head, and I was talking to a buddy of mine who smoked for his mental health, or that's what he said. He smokes for his mental health among other things, but he was I guess the guy that pushed me over the edge, and that's where I got a cartridge from and started smoking. Prior to this, my experience with marijuana was just, I don't know, a dozen times in high school maybe, and a couple times in college, and it was just more the party scene. Um, when you're drinking, you're smoking. It was that type of thing. I never really used it for any other purpose or thought about using it for any other purpose. So the way I was using it when I first started, and again, this is like right at the tip of when everything came to a head with psychiatry and everything. So I was just smoking it, maybe 2 or 3 hits of the cartridge every night, and just going to bed and almost using it as just kind of like a numbing tool. And then I'd say maybe week 2 or 3, and I felt good doing that. It was it made me relaxed, and it did make me feel better during the day. But I'd say 2 weeks into it or so, I started just allowing myself to drift with the thoughts that I was having with it, starting to listen to music with it, and trying to, it sounds corny, but trying to almost be with it, be with the feeling, and started discovering a lot of the past issues that I had started coming to the surface, and I started to evaluate them. But at the time, I had no way of elegantly trying to explain that, other than, hey, doc, or hey, to my therapist, I'm smoking weed every night. I'm not smoking a ton, but it makes me feel good, like any other fucking pothead. And they just weren't vibing with it. And they kept telling me that I was using it as a numbing tool. The psychiatrist was really, really against it. And the therapist was not happy with it, but he felt that it was just going to be kind of a crutch that I was using for the moment, and I was going to get over it. And it seemed like every therapy session or psychiatry session I had, that topic would come up, and I just couldn't put my finger on why I thought it was working, other than it was making me feel better. And that just wasn't enough of an argument to stand up on. And I finally just said, fuck it. I said, I have to just trust my gut on this and keep exploring what I think was helping. And it's not that the therapy wasn't helping. It like I said, it gave me some tools, but there was just something different with the marijuana. It felt like I was repairing things, other than trying to just figure out why they were broken. The decision to do that led me on a wild ride. I don't regret it at all, but it was definitely a wild ride of really looking myself in the mirror, because I had already made that commitment to myself that this was going to be my last stand against the part of myself that wasn't allowing me to progress in my life. And I was just going to do it, whatever it took. And it took a lot of looking into the mirror. And I'm not advocating doing that alone, and not having a therapist or a psychiatrist through that. But I kind of went on this self journey, and it worked for me. And it changed my life forever. So don't mean to leave you on too much of a cliffhanger, but that's going to be episode number 2. And we're going to talk about spirituality, meditation, my use of cannabis in meditation, and some other fun stuff. So I hope you join me there. And until next time, I will see you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please help raise the vibe by sharing this podcast with friends and family. For more real conversations, show notes, and to connect, head over to lralchemy.com. Until next time, peace.